large number of attendees on the call today. For that reason, the audience will be muted. Second, a reminder that today's presentation is eligible for continuing education credit through Earmark, so I will go over how to get your CE credit at the end of this presentation. My name is Jared Morgan, and I am an account executive here at Harbor Compliance. My email address is listed here, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you think of any questions after this call, whether that's today, tomorrow, or in the future. I'll also show you my contact info at the end of this webinar. A little bit about Harbor Compliance. We are experts in the architecture, engineering, and contractor licensing. Since 2012, we've helped over 40,000 clients simplify navigating regulatory requirements. In the AEC industry alone, we have helped over 8,700 AEC firms apply for, secure, and maintain licensing, business lifestyle, and tax requirements. More about us later, but for now, we have a lot to cover, so let's jump on in. First on today's agenda, we are going to cover the benefits of compliance and how it helps your firm strategically. Then we'll discuss what to expect in AEC firm licensing. This ties closely to business entity issues that arise from firms expanding into new jurisdictions. Because these are regulated at the state and even local levels, we'll keep the discussion broad enough to address key concepts, but we'll illustrate a few examples that multi-state firms and many of you may be facing currently. We'll discuss the comprehensive management solution that firms need to comply with all regulations, avoid potential issues, and mitigate risk, and how, with a proactive approach, firms can be better primed to compete. Many of you probably already understand the importance of licensing compliance because if you are a licensed architect or engineer, you've been maintaining a license since you graduated college. But it's essential to also consider how maintaining compliance can create value for your firm. One of the things that we'll cover today is why firms need to focus on both individual and firm licenses to maintain good standing and how those two things are connected. There are plenty of reasons why compliance is important beyond just the law. It unlocks opportunities. For example, organizations commonly list the states where they are licensed to operate on their website to highlight their reach and expertise. It enables firms to pursue new business, meet their timelines, and gain an edge over the competitors that haven't been as proactive. It safeguards your firm's reputation. Staying in good standing avoids penalties and avoids damaging how your firm is perceived. It also upholds the overall professional standards of architects, engineers, and contractors. So there are clear benefits, but what does the licensing process actually look like? As professionals, you already know the basics of licensing. You know that the AEC firms are regulated by state and local agencies for public safety reasons. Licensing helps build public trust, and the bridges and buildings around us are safe and sound. You also know that the licensing process requires engineers and architects to complete professional education, sit for proficiency exams, and keep up to date with the continuing education credits, which they then report to the state licensing boards as a part of renewing their licenses. You probably also know that firms also face licensing requirements. Before companies can apply for these licenses, known as certificates of authorization, they need to ensure that their legal entities meet certain requirements surrounding naming, business structure, and also ownership. Once those prerequisites are met, they have to register their legal entity name with the Secretary of State. And importantly, they have to select at least one qualified individual as professional in responsible charge, aka the qualifier when applying for that AEC license. From that point, both the firm and the individual need to renew their licenses regularly, and the legal entity needs to maintain registration with the Secretary of State or local equivalent. The link between the qualifier licenses and the firm certificate of authorization is absolutely key. If the qualifier fails to maintain their licenses, it puts the entire firm's ability to transact business in that jurisdiction at risk. Something that's vital to recognize is that even though each state might have its own requirements, which we'll dig deeper into later, they don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, nearly every licensing board asks about legal and financial penalties occurring in other states. That means that if you fail to complete your regular licensing requirements in one state, the damage can spread to everywhere you do business. In other words, when you lose good standing in one state, you might lose your eligibility to apply for licenses everywhere else. Now, I'd like to start off with the 4 most common challenges that we see in managing AEC licenses. It's managing qualifiers, securing new licenses, managing renewals, and monitoring changes to requirements. Let's dive right in managing the individual licenses of the professionals tied to your certificates of authorization. These are referred to a lot of different names, such as professional and responsible charge, managing agent, qualifying professional, etc. For simplicity, we can just use the catch-all term qualifiers. A qualifier is the licensed individual designated on your firm's license as responsible for the firm's work in that state. As the saying goes, there is the license on the line. Managing qualifiers is critical for businesses because, as we just outlined, the licensure of these individuals directly impacts the overall standings of the firm's license. This quote from the state of Illinois illustrates how important this is. The design firm will become inoperable for all professionals if the license of even one managing agent becomes inactive or not renewed. That's why it is essential to be on top of every single license for professionals in responsible charge at your firm. In most states, without a licensed qualifier, the firm's initial license application will be denied. Also, any change in the qualifier's information or a change in the qualifier altogether must be reported within a short period of time. Usually that is within 30 days, but in some states that can be as few as 10 days. Now we know that changes in qualifiers can happen for all kinds of reasons, such as an individual moving home address. They can also happen for more significant reasons, such as an individual departing from the firm, retirement, resignation, or winning the lottery. Whether these changes are sudden or expected, firm management needs to be ready to update state licensing boards. If an existing qualifier leaves and no one holds a proper state license, someone is going to have to sit in for the exam. And if the firm does not report the change, states can and do assess severe penalties for operating without a designated qualifier, up to denial of the firm's right to practice. Since nearly every licensing board asks for a legal and financial action occurring in other states, the damage can spread across all of your businesses and range from financial to reputation and everything in between. This is why managing qualifiers is mission critical for your firm. Here's what you can do to meet this challenge proactively. First, know which qualifier or qualifiers will be designated for each business entity in each state. Many states have issued licenses to specific areas of specialty, such as structural versus mechanical for engineers and residential versus commercial for contractors. Firms that practice in multiple areas across states need to know the licenses for each. When attempting to register in a new state, this means any qualifiers generally must be licensed in advance. Firms must be proactive. No one wants to miss a key opportunity because a qualifier was not licensed in time. Next, let's ask your team, do you know who your firm or firms qualifiers are currently? In which states and entities are you acting in that capacity? If that person leaves the firm tomorrow, who could fill the role within just a few weeks or even days? Answering those questions will identify any gaps you need to address. Lapsed licenses may incur penalties to reinstate your business. So it's better to tackle these types of issues head on. Once your licenses are in order, work to identify the individuals who could step in as a replacement qualifier. Firms should work towards having a contingency plan, especially in your key jurisdictions. And you must consider the state processing times as well. We'll talk about this later, but you'll probably already know that licensure involves multiple agencies. Many licensing boards have only a handful of staff or meet on infrequent bases, such as monthly. Expediting an application simply may not be possible regardless of who handles their submissions. The state of New York, for example, can take upwards of up to 4 months to approve a formation of a national corporation. And that's assuming everything was submitted in exact accordance with the state's standards and timelines. As a result, management must take a significantly longer term view with respect to licensing. Compliance becomes very important to the firm's ability to pursue out of state opportunities, as well as maintain the right to practice on an ongoing basis. It is simply not possible to react or attempt to pursue licensure in response to an opportunity. Most times that opportunity is already passed. Finally, much like managing firm licenses, firms need to invest in a way to manage their qualifiers. An ideal solution includes software to track qualifiers, information across states, giving management immediate visibility into who is licensed where, and producing an actionable list of tasks whenever a departure occurs at your company. The next area I want to dig into is applying for professional licensure in the first place. There are over 800 state and local licensing requirements across the US. Researching and understanding these varying requirements for each license type in each jurisdiction is a massive, massive challenge. Each state may have a business and licensing regulations with certain prerequisites involving firm licenses, individual qualifiers licenses, and entity registration. It's important to understand the order in which these applications and supporting documents must be submitted. And not only do you need to apply for these secure licenses, but you also need to communicate them to the rest of your firm. The marketing team wants to submit bids, but they can't bid in states where the firm isn't yet licensed. You need to make sure that they have clear insight into where they are already licensed, so then you can act on new opportunities. Similarly, HR might want to hire employees in new states, but they don't know whether the firm is already licensed there, so they might miss out on highly talented candidates. One of the most common times that firms need to obtain new licenses is when they are expanding into other states, which brings us to the topic of foreign qualification. When registering for foreign qualification, the exact requirements can vary tremendously, and AEC firms are particularly susceptible to hyper-specific restrictions. First off, different states can structure the process differently and have varying forms that need to be filed with the appropriate state agencies, Secretary of State, Department of Revenue, and licensing boards, all before beginning to transact business. Because of these differences, there are also be a huge variation in processing times and expected approval timelines. We'll take a look at a few examples that in just a minute here, but it's also important to research each state's process and the order of operations between agencies when registering the business in another state. which we'll also dive into in another minute. AEC firms face business structure requirements when foreign qualifying too. You're probably familiar with certain professional entity types like professional corporation, professional association, or PLLC, which stands for Professional Limited Liability Company. Professional entities are registered and named at the state level, and the requirements also differ from state to state. In addition, many states have distinct entity name requirements for AE firms specifically. In most states, only companies that are authorized to practice architecture or engineering are able to use those names and terms in the legal names. Other states actually require that licensed firms use those names and terms in their specific name. For firms that were originally formed in the state that don't require one of those words, they may need an assumed name in that new foreign state. That includes that term in order to comply. And the forced assumed name must be used in the state on everything from tax accounts, firm licenses, and even contracts and invoices. As a matter of consumer protection, states want the principals of AEC firms operating in their states to be licensed, hence qualified to run the practice. But states have varying ownership thresholds. That's one more thing you'll have to consider when expanding your business. And while you're entering all of these new states, don't forget about the tax registrations. As you go through the process of expansion, it becomes more and more challenging to lean on different tools and vendors. Centralizing your licenses via one platform can make the expansion process far easier for you, so you always know where to find the correct information all in one place. You can see the QR code on your screen there. We put together a comprehensive guide to foreign qualification, so definitely use that as a resource. I'm going to also add in here our first poll question, which is expanding registrations. Launching the poll now. Does your firm need or plan to register in any additional states within the next 6 months? Great to see a lot of quick answers coming in that a lot of us are expanding into new states. Congrats on your expansion. And in that first poll, I see a few chats coming in. We'll answer them at the end. If we don't get to them at the end, we will reach out via email to assist. As I alluded to earlier, firms need to fully understand the order of entity structure, naming, and ownership requirements before attempting to register or pursue licensure in a new state, because the order of operations between state agencies varies. In some states, like New York, an engineering firm actually has to begin the process of licensure with the state education department before it registers with the Department of State. But in others, like South Carolina, the entity registration happens before the firm applies for its license. And in most states, at least one qualifier must first have their individual professional license. With all these different requirements and restrictions, many firms end up creating new entities for their work in different states. That can allow them to better meet the structuring and naming requirements for each jurisdiction. The downside of all that is that each entity has its own filing requirements, so creating entities creates additional reporting on that side of life. Let's take a closer look at what it actually looks like to obtain licensure in a new state. In this case, let's use New York. Here's an example of a fast-growing Maryland-based firm. They had an employee starting in the new state of New York in just a month. In New York, foreign registration with the Department of State can take several weeks on its own. To set up the domestic design professional corporation can take months. coupled with the time it takes the Department of Taxation and Finance to process tax registration applications and the Department of Labor to set up unemployment tax accounts. You can conservatively add about 3 weeks to about another month. That means that you really need to get started at a minimum of 15 weeks before the employee start date. Any additional delay jeopardizes the firm's ability to onboard and pay that individual employee. Firms everywhere are running into the same issue, setting up in the state, especially filing and securing the various registrations and accounts across agency takes time. With out-of-state registration, it's not practical to wait until you have an employee ready to start, and it's not efficient to repeat the scramble in each new state. Management, and especially HR and legal teams, need to be in lockstep, reviewing the hiring pipeline and ensuring registrations are in order as soon as it becomes feasible. The next area I want to focus on today is renewals. You're already set up and fully licensed in a new state, but eventually you'll have to renew those licenses. So what does that entail? To start, there are some obligations that every business has that must be renewed regularly. We've touched on each state of these already. We have the qualifier license, the firm license, the Secretary of State registration, and any unique state requirements. Renewal applications usually require proof of good standing from the Secretary of State as well. And keeping all these up to date is important because there's consequences if a filing is missed. If a business misses even a single filing, it immediately faces consequences that start with late fees and increase all the way to administrative action and the denial to right to do business in that state. Administrative action can usually be undone by a process called reinstatement, where the firm pays the back taxes, filing fees, and penalties. But it's a costly and lengthy process, not to mention the reinstatement becomes part of the business's permanent record. Sometimes firms that have an entity that no longer operates in a state, so they decide they don't want to pay the fees or keep up to the obligation to maintain it. Then suddenly they find an opportunity in that state a few months later. But now they've fallen out of good standing and have to go on and play catch up. They even end up paying more in reinstatement fees than the original filing costs. A more cost-effective solution and option would have been to withdraw the entity and re-foreign qualify, or to maintain an agent and file the necessary annual reports all along. In general, both maintaining an entity and closing it properly are less expensive and less risky than letting it lapse into non-compliance. So we've broken down the renewal process into 4 key steps, which are the research, prepare, submit, and monitor those renewals. Let's start with research. The important thing is that you take the time to know what exactly you need to file in order to renew all of your licenses. Yes, that includes most of the materials you originally submitted for your initial application, but requirements can also change year to year as state governments update their processes. Once licensed in a given jurisdiction, your firm will have a license ID numbers, registration dates, renewal deadlines, and continuously changing requirements to navigate 1,500 different AEC filings around the country. Keeping up with changes to requirements can be time-consuming. And as the firm grows and becomes licensed in multiple jurisdictions or specialties, the complexity then increases. You'll also have to ensure that you capture the updated information from your registered agent, whether that's a new qualifications, updated personal information like the changed name or address, or just a new registered agent entirely. You'll also want to check for any changes to your business formation documents, and maybe most importantly, you'll need to check for changes to your state's forms and fees. In addition to updating their requirements, states are constantly changing the formats of their forms and exactly what information you need to submit. It can be tricky to stay on top of all of this. Step 2 is actually gathering all of the updated information to submit with your renewal application. There can be a lot of pull together things here, so make sure you leave yourself adequate time to avoid any late penalties and fees. Nearly every state requires business entities to file an updated annual report to ensure it keeps current information on record. Because each state has a unique deadline, a multi-state business faces deadlines throughout the entire year. Reports can be due on a yearly or bi-yearly basis. You'll also need to file annual financial statements along with proof of your qualifiers, licenses, and their continuing education certificates. Make sure you're tracking these in one central location as they are completed through the year so you don't have to hunt them down right before renewal time. You'll also need to pull your current surety bond of insurance documentation to ensure that those are in good standing and compliant with the state requirements. Many states also require businesses to file and pay taxes to maintain corporate good standing, such as California, New York, and Texas. Pulling all of these documents together every time you have renewal deadlines, which, as we mentioned, can be at different times of the year for different states, can be a hassle. So it's essential to keep these stored in one central location to expedite the process for your business. The third step in the renewal process is actually submitting your renewal applications. And the most important part here is that you hit your deadlines. You don't want any unnecessary late fees or potential hiccups that could impact your ability to do business. Make sure you're tracking different states, different renewal cycles, whether they are yearly or every 2 years, whether they're on the first of the month, on the anniversary of your initial licensing, or a different date entirely. Many firms expect their individual engineers to manage their own continuing education and license renewals, but that can increase risk because the firm has no oversight. Because even a single lapse license from a qualifying engineer can have a major consequence. The firm should invest in a solution that, at a minimum, gives the management direct insight into status of practitioners in any state at any time. Finally, make sure to be aware that the more jurisdictions you expand into, the more complex and time-consuming this process can be. Be sure you're allocating the proper resources and implementing the right systems to streamline it. Relying on spreadsheets and manual reminders runs the risk of critical lapse, leading to direct financial penalties. More importantly, it risks a gap in the ability to operate and secure new business in new states. Finally, once you've finished your renewal application and you've been approved, you still want to monitor for any changes. As mentioned, state legislatures are always passing new regulatory bills and department level changes. It's vital that you stay up to date, which can be a bit overwhelming if you are in multiple states. Some states also require that you file immediate updates to your licenses if certain events occur. For example, I mentioned earlier that a change in the qualifier requires updated filing. Typically within 30 days, but sometimes as quickly as 10, you need to make sure you know exactly what events will trigger maintenance filings in each state so that you don't miss any deadlines. You'll also have to ensure that you are maintaining good standing with the Secretary of State and Department of Revenue in each state. I mean, staying up to date with taxes and fees, maintenance filings, documentation, and more. Also mentioned earlier, many licensing jurisdictions stipulate that the businesses maintains internal records and follows certain governance or ownership requirements. These may or may not need to be reported on the licensing renewal applications, but most agencies have the authority to enforce and penalize governance violations. We have one customer who's headquartered in Texas, but now operates in 23 wholly owned subsidiaries across 9 states. As they expand, they found that some subsidiaries weren't keeping their compliance data well organized, and their executive administrator was spending more time on license filings than her primary job responsibilities. Once they switched to our centralized platform, they were able to automate renewals, reporting, and regulatory tasks and track updated requirements much easier. To recap, there is a lot to track, especially if you're doing business across multiple states. As you can see on the side, there are 800 plus AEC licenses, 1,500 plus AEC licensing filings, 2,000 plus US filing authorities, 20,000 plus unique filings. You have the Secretary of State, licensing, and tax related items, and then 50 plus states, CE, PDH requirements. To best keep track of all these changing requirements, we highly recommend a few best practices. First, be sure to conduct a review every single year. This isn't just a review of your documentation and business information, it's a review of your internal processes. You should be looking regularly to see how you can better manage your internal records to make sure that you are ready to file quickly when the time comes, and also that the appropriate members of your team have access to your latest licenses and upcoming deadlines. Second, make sure to incorporate new requirements into your licensing and compliance management systems. As those requirements change, manual systems like spreadsheets can quickly become outdated, so you'll need to update these regularly. Finally, allow ample time to complete these new applications and filings. If there's one thing that you should take away from this presentation, it's that the process takes a lot more time than you initially thought. So you should never wait until the last minute to start a renewal process. Going to add another poll question here. Last poll question. How's your firm currently managing professional licenses? Are you utilizing spreadsheets? Are you doing your own internal system? Are you using a third-party provider or an attorney? Seeing a lot of mixed answers. It's great to see. Yep, and we typically see spreadsheets as the most common answer here, which I'm seeing right now. Okay, thank you for the poll. At this point, we've covered key licensing, entity, and tax issues, both as concepts and in example forms. Let's now talk about specific ways a firm can navigate this regulatory environment. It all starts with a proactive and comprehensive system for compliance. As you'll see, it involves a top-down strategy, as well as the right people, process, and technology to execute. These are key components of what a proactive compliance system might include. You have establishing a system for business information and records. It's tracking your entity, tax, and licensing data, managing corporate tax and licensing filings. You have maintaining registered agents and timely notification on key staff. You have to command of renewals of firm and professional individuals' licenses, incorporate CE requirements and certifications, and also defining internal roles and processes. To be clear, every firm is unique, handles their compliance differently. What we share here is a general in nature and based our expertise experience working with organizations of all different sizes. But we do encourage you to take these ideas back to your management teams and legal counsel in order to shape your overall compliance program. Harbor Compliance does offer a solution to many of these challenges you've heard in the presentation today. We've taken all these strategies and built a service and suite and software around all of them. We've built cloud-based compliance software and continuously maintain a database of nationwide requirements. It keeps everyone in your organization up to date on the registration status in each state. It provides a secure, efficient, and effective way for your organization to maintain and access essential compliance information. Of course, organizations that register in multiple states and have multiple entities gain additional value. Access to our software is available as part of our managed services or standalone. There are 4 purpose-built modules, which is License Manager, Entity Manager, Tax Manager, and Records Manager. So when we talk about needing a single place to manage registration data, records, and reporting deadlines, our software modules do just that. They provide your organization with valuable reporting insights needed to easily access where your business is registered. At this point, we do want to thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, today's session is eligible for continuing education credit through Earmark. You can use that QR code on your screen now to download the Earmark app. And after the session concludes, we will email out a 5-question quiz. Once you complete the quiz, you will receive your CPE certificate. I did see a few questions coming in here. Some of these questions are personal, so we will reach out with these answers via email. And at this point, we do want to thank you for joining us today and offer you a free Harbor Compliance score, where we will verify your compliance status for the various business entities you have set up nationwide. If you're interested in getting the free Harbor Compliance score, please let us know in the chat box or reach out to us. You have my email on the screen there after this presentation. I'm going to stay on the call for a few minutes to see if there's any more questions that come in. But like I said, we will email out answers to those questions. So thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.